The baby wasn't breathing. That was the first thing Ava noticed when she walked through the door. Not the marble floors, not the floor-to-ceiling, windows overlooking the city, not the kind of silence that only exists in homes that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, just the baby on the couch. Too still, too quiet. And the man, this tall, broad-shouldered man she had never met before in her life, standing over him with both hands shaking, phone pressed to his ear, voice cracking in a way that made it clear he had never been this afraid of anything. No, once, no, ever. I don't know what happened, he was saying into the phone. He was fine. He was fine 20 minutes ago, and now he is not. Ava dropped her bag. She crossed the room in 4 steps, gently moved the man aside with one hand, and placed 2 fingers against the baby's neck. Then she tilted his tiny chin back, just slightly, and watched his chest. There, a rise, barely. But there, he is breathing, she said quietly. But something is blocking his airway. Call 911 right now. No, that number 911. The man stared at her like she had just appeared from thin air, like he couldn't decide whether to trust a woman he had never seen before or keep panicking. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I am the nanny," Ava said, already turning the baby onto his side. "And you are wasting time. Call 911. He called. The ambulance came in 6 minutes. The baby, this tiny, helpless, 6-month-old boy who had been in this man's care for exactly 4 days, had swallowed a button. A small ivory button from a shirt that should never have been within his reach. He was fine. He would be perfectly fine. But in those 6 minutes between Ava walking through that door and the paramedics arriving, something happened that neither of them would fully understand until much later. Diego Bicari, billionaire, bachelor, and the most emotionally unavailable man in any room he walked into, sat on the floor of his own penthouse and cried. No, because he was weak. No, because he was dramatic. Because for the first time in his entire adult life, something mattered more to him than himself, and he had almost lost it. And the only reason he hadn't was a 23-year-old woman in a yellow jacket who had walked through his door 30 seconds before everything fell apart. He would think about those 30 seconds for a very long time. So would she. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been with us for a while, you already know that the stories we tell in this space are the ones that stay with you. The ones that remind you that love doesn't always arrive the way you planned it. Sometimes it walks through your door at exactly the right moment and changes everything before you even learn its name. This is one of those stories. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a comment below, and tell us where in the world you are watching from, because this story is already traveling, and we want to know exactly how far. No, let's get back to it. 3 weeks before she walked into that penthouse, Ava Moreno was sitting on the floor of her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes, a half-eaten granola bar, and the slowly dawning realization that a degree in child development did not automatically come with a job. She had done everything right, graduated on time, maintained a solid GPA, done her internships, written the thank you emails after every interview, and still, 3 months after walking across that stage in her cap and gown, she was back in her mother's house with no income, no prospects, and a student loan that was beginning to feel less like a debt and more like a personality trait. Her mother, Rosa, was a warm woman who never made Ava feel like a burden. But Ava could feel it anyway, that quiet, invisible weight of being 23 and still needing someone else's roof. She had promised herself when she left for college that she would never come back dependent, that she would build something of her own, that she would stand on her own 2 feet before she stood anywhere else. The floor had other plans. It was her Aunt Carmen who suggested the babysitting. Carmen moved in different circles. She had spent 30 years as a personal concierge to some of the wealthiest families in the city, and over those decades she had built a network that most people only dreamed about. She knew who needed what before they knew they needed it, and she had a way of making opportunities sound like they were doing you a favor by existing. "I have 3 families," she told Ava over the phone one Tuesday morning. "Good families, quiet money, nobody dramatic, You'd be looking after children between the ages of 6 months and 5 years, flexible hours, cash at the end of every week. It is not forever, but it is something. Ava had paused. Aunt Carmen, I have a degree. I know you have a degree, baby, and the degree will find you. But rent doesn't wait for degrees. She wasn't wrong. So Ava said yes. She told herself it was temporary, a bridge, something to do while the right opportunity made its way to her. She was good with children. Had always been good with children, even as a teenager, even before she studied them. There was something about small people that made sense to her in a way that adults sometimes didn't. Children were honest. They didn't perform. They didn't hide what they needed. You always knew exactly where you stood with a child. Adults, in her experience, were considerably more complicated. She started with 2 families the first week. A 4-year-old girl named Lily, whose parents worked long hours and needed someone from 3 to 7 on weekdays, and a set of toddler twin boys whose mother was recovering from surgery and needed an extra pair of hands. Both families were straightforward. Both children were sweet, and by the end of the first week Ava had enough cash in her hand to feel just slightly like she was standing on solid ground. She didn't know yet that the 3rd family was coming. She didn't know that a phone call was about to arrive that would alter the entire direction of her life. She didn't know about Diego Beccari at all. Diego had built his life with a very deliberate architecture, work at the center, everything else at the edges. Women he enjoyed, but never got close enough to need. Friends he trusted, but never burdened with anything real. A schedule so full it left no room for the kind of stillness that might force him to examine what was missing. He wasn't cold. That was the thing people always got wrong about men like Diego. He was generous, actually, quietly generous, the kind of generous that didn't need an audience. He paid his staff well. He remembered names. He sent flowers to his mother every Sunday, without fail, and called her every Wednesday, whether he had 5 minutes or 50. But emotionally, he kept the door shut. No, locked, just shut. Just enough to ensure that nobody could walk in far enough to rearrange the furniture. He had his reasons. He grew up watching love cost people everything. His father had loved his mother with a recklessness that left the whole family broke twice before Diego turned 10. He had watched devotion turn into desperation, and devotion turn into disaster, and by the time he was old enough to make his own choices, he had made a quiet private decision that he would never hand that kind of power to another person. So he kept things light, he kept things moving, he stayed in motion because stillness asked questions he wasn't ready to answer. By 34 he had built 3 successful companies, acquired 2 more, and was in the process of expanding internationally. His name was on buildings. His face had been in magazines, though he hated that. He had a penthouse that took up the entire top floor of one of the most sought-after addresses in the city, a house on the coast he visited twice a year, and a life that looked, from the outside, like the definition of success. He was also profoundly alone in the way that only very busy people manage to be, surrounded by everyone and known by no one. He had dated. Of course he had dated. There had been women who were brilliant, women who were beautiful, women who challenged him, and women who simply wanted to be near the orbit of what he had built. He enjoyed their company. He was never deliberately unkind, but at some point, inevitably, they would want more than he was offering, and at some point, inevitably, he would step back gently, cleanly. The way you close a book you enjoyed but don't intend to finish. There had been one woman 4 years ago who came closer than the others. Her name was Serena. She was electric and unpredictable, and she matched his energy in a way that surprised him. They weren't in love, he knew that even then, but they were something charged and alive and slightly dangerous. It lasted 8 months, ended mutually, or so he thought, and then she was gone and he had filed it away under interesting but finished and moved on. He had not thought about Serena in well over a year, and then she was at his door. It was a Tuesday. Diego remembered that specifically, a Tuesday in October, overcast and cold, the kind of afternoon that feels like the city is exhaling. He had just come off a 4-hour meeting and was looking forward to an hour of silence before his evening calls began. He opened the door. Serena stood in the hallway with hollow eyes and a baby carrier on her chest. For a moment nobody spoke. Diego stared at her. She stared back. And then the baby made a sound, a small, unremarkable sound, the kind babies make when they shift in their sleep, and Diego's eyes dropped to the carrier, and his entire body went still. "Serena, I know," she said. "I know what you are going to say. How old? 6 months. The math arrived before he was ready for it. I can't do this," Serena said. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was flat, exhausted in a way that went past tired and into something closer to emptied out. "I know that sounds terrible. I know how it sounds, but I genuinely, truly cannot do this, Diego. I have been doing it alone for 6 months, and I am not okay. And he deserves better than not okay. Serena, you need to come inside, and we need to. His name is Matteo," she said. And then she unclipped the carrier, and before Diego could finish his sentence, she had placed the baby, this tiny, warm, sleeping baby boy, into his arms with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times, and knew that if she slowed down she would lose her nerve. Diego held Matteo with the stiff, terrified posture of someone holding a bomb. "There is a bag," Serena said, placing it at his feet. "Formula, diapers, his bear. He likes the bear. He needs it to sleep." "Serena, stop. We are not doing this right now like this." "I am sorry," she said, and she meant it. He could see that she meant it. Whatever had brought her to this doorway had cost her something enormous, and he would never fully know what it was. "I am so sorry, Diego. He is yours. I had him tested. There is paperwork in the bag." She turned. "Serena," she walked away. He stood in his doorway holding a sleeping 6-month-old boy he had not known existed 45 seconds ago, watching the elevator doors close on the mother, and felt the entire architecture of his carefully constructed life crack, straight down the middle. Matteo opened his eyes. They were dark and round and completely unimpressed by the crisis occurring around them. Diego looked down at him. "Okay," he whispered to no one in particular. "Okay." The first 72 hours were, by Diego's own later admission, a masterclass in humility. He had managed companies through crises. He had negotiated deals in 3 languages under impossible pressure. He had once sat across a table from a man trying to take everything he had built and walked away having taken more than he came with. A 6-month-old baby defeated him completely. No, because Matteo was difficult. He wasn't. He was, in fact, a remarkably calm baby, curious and watchful, in the way that suggested he was already quietly cataloguing the world. But Diego didn't know the rhythm, didn't know when he was hungry versus tired versus simply wanting to be held, didn't know that the bear, a small, worn thing with one button eye, was not optional, didn't know that the bath water needed to be tested with an elbow, not a hand, didn't know any of it and had no instinct to fall back on. He called his friend Marcus on the second night at 11:30, standing in his kitchen holding a crying baby and a bottle of formula he wasn't sure he had prepared correctly. "I need help," he said. That alone was remarkable. Diego Beccari did not say those words. Marcus arrived within the hour, not to help with the baby, because Marcus was also childless and equally clueless, but to help Diego think, and it was Marcus who said, while they both stared at Matteo lying peacefully on a blanket on the floor, as though the previous 2 hours of screaming had been someone else's problem, "You need a nanny, a real one. No, an agency form, someone who actually knows what they're doing. Find me someone," Diego said. "I might know someone," Marcus said slowly. "She has been looking after the Henderson kids on my street, young, just out of college. But she is good, like genuinely good. The kids are obsessed with her, and she studied this, child development or something." Diego looked at Matteo. Matteo looked at Diego. "Call her," Diego said. Ava was at Lily's house when the unknown number called. She almost didn't answer. She had a strict rule about unknown numbers during working hours, but something made her step into the hallway and pick up. "Is this Ava Moreno?" A male voice measured. The kind of voice that was used to people listening when it spoke. "It is. Who is calling?" "My name is Diego Beccari. You were recommended to me by a mutual contact, Marcus Webb. I am in need of a nanny full-time. Live in if you are open to it, though that is negotiable. The child is 6 months old, a boy named Matteo. A brief pause. I'll be honest with you. I have no idea what I am doing and I need someone who does. Ava leaned against the wall. How soon? Yesterday, he said. But I'd settle for this week. Mr. Beccari, I'd need to know more before I commit to anything. I have other families I am currently. Name your rate, he said. Whatever you are making across all of them combined, I'll double it plus accommodation, meals, use of a car. I need someone reliable and I need someone good, and I've been told you are both. Ava was quiet for a moment. No, because she was calculating, she was listening to the exhaustion underneath the composed voice. The slight rawness of a man who had been awake too many nights running. I'd want to meet Matteo first, she said. Before I agree to anything, of course, he said. When are you free? She told him Thursday. He said Tuesday was better. She said Thursday. A pause. Then, Thursday. She smiled at the wall where no one could see it. She told herself, on the drive over that Thursday, that she was simply going to assess the situation, that she hadn't committed to anything, that she had every right to walk in, meet the child, decide it wasn't the right fit, and walk back out. She told herself that on the way up in the elevator. She told herself that standing at the front door, and then the door opened and Diego Beccari stood in front of her holding a baby who was chewing enthusiastically on the collar of a very expensive shirt, and the man looked so simultaneously powerful and completely defeated that every prepared thing she had planned to say completely left her. He looked at her, she looked at him. Matteo looked at both of them and kept chewing. You must be Ava, Diego said. And you must be exhausted, she replied. Something crossed his face, surprise maybe, or the particular relief of someone who has been holding it together for long enough that being seen by a stranger lands harder than expected. Come in, he said. She came in. And then, of course, 20 minutes later, Matteo stopped breathing properly, and Ava dropped her bag, and the next 6 minutes happened the way they happened. And nothing was the same after that. She said yes. No, because of the money, though the money was significant and her student loan had opinions about that. She said yes because of Matteo. Because of the way he had looked at her in the hospital waiting room, on Diego's lap, turning her ring around on her finger with complete absorption, while the adults around him talked in low, anxious voices. Because of the way he had fallen asleep in her arms on the drive back while Diego sat in the front passenger seat and stared out the window with the expression of a man renegotiating everything he thought he knew about himself. You didn't walk away from a baby like that. She moved in on Saturday. The penthouse had a guest suite that was larger than the apartment she had been planning to rent. She didn't say that out loud. She unpacked her 2 suitcases and set her degree certificate on the nightstand, more as a reminder to herself than for any other reason. This is temporary, it said. This is a bridge. You know where you are going. She believed that. For about 4 days, Diego was an unusual presence to live with. He was not what she had expected, though she realized quickly that she had expected the wrong things. She had expected arrogance, entitlement, the casual assumption that the world arranged itself around his preferences, and there were traces of that, yes. He was someone who had been in charge of rooms for a long time, and it showed in the way he moved through spaces. But with Matteo, all of it fell away. He was trying so hard. That was the thing that caught her off guard. The effort, the very visible, very earnest, slightly heartbreaking effort of a man learning from scratch how to care for another person. He watched everything she did with Matteo, with the focused intensity he probably brought to financial projections, and then he tried to replicate it, and sometimes he got it right, and his face did something quiet, and pleased that he clearly didn't know was visible. And sometimes he got it wrong, and Matteo cried, and Diego looked at Ava with an expression that said, "What did I do?" And she would tell him gently, and he would try again. He never stopped trying. She had not expected that. She set ground rules in the first week because ground rules were important, and she was a professional, and this was a professional arrangement. No calling her Ava in front of clients, as though they were friends. In those contexts, she was Miss Moreno, clear working hours, even within the live-in structure. Her evenings after 7 were her own unless there was a genuine emergency. Her Sundays were protected. Diego agreed to all of it without negotiating a single point. She found that slightly disorienting. The first time it shifted was on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks in. Ava had put Matteo down at 7:30. He was sleeping longer and more reliably now, a development that Diego had celebrated with a quiet, genuine smile that she was still thinking about the next morning, for reasons she preferred not to examine. She had made herself tea and was sitting on the window seat of the living room, reading when Diego came home from an evening meeting at 9:15. He stopped when he saw her there. "I didn't know you'd still be up," he said. "It is my living room too, technically during working hours. It is after 7, those are your hours." "I was comfortable," she said simply. "How was your meeting?" He looked at her for a moment like the question had confused him. Then he set down his jacket and his phone and sat in the chair across from her in a way that suggested he also, suddenly, just wanted to be somewhere quiet. "Long," he said, "mostly pointless. A kind of meeting that exists to schedule other meetings." She laughed genuinely. He watched her laugh with an expression she didn't catch because she was looking at her tea. They talked for an hour and 12 minutes. About nothing consequential. She told him about a moment that afternoon where Matteo had discovered his own feat with the expression of someone who had just solved a great mystery, and Diego laughed at that, a real laugh, unguarded and sudden, and then asked her questions about child development that were so specific and thoughtful that she found herself explaining things she hadn't talked about since her thesis, and he listened to every word. At 10:30 she said good night. Lying in bed, she told herself he was just being polite. He was tired, and you were there. Don't construct a narrative around a Wednesday. She was good at telling herself things. She was getting slightly less good at believing them. Diego, on the other side of the penthouse, was doing his own version of the same conversation with himself. He had been around many women. He was not easily moved by proximity or charm or even genuine connection. He was good at appreciating people without getting attached to them. It was a skill he had spent years refining. Ava was making it inconveniently difficult to deploy. It wasn't one thing, it was the accumulation. The way she talked to Matteo like he was a full person whose opinions mattered. The way she set the exact same ground rules on week 1, and then sat in his living room past 7 on week 3, and didn't even seem to notice the contradiction. Because, to her, it wasn't a contradiction. It was just life. It was just being human. It was just doing what felt natural in the moment. The way she had walked into a stranger's home during a crisis and just handled it without performance or panic, or even waiting to be asked. The way she laughed, the way the laugh happened before she could decide whether to let it. He told himself what he always told himself: she works for you. That is the entire boundary. That is where it stays. He told himself that convincingly. He told himself that every night for another 3 weeks. No story about Diego and Ava would be complete without understanding what Matteo was doing to both of them, quietly, consistently, without the slightest awareness of his own influence. He was an extraordinary baby. No, in a way that required announcement. He simply had a presence, a gravity. He watched the world with enormous dark eyes and seemed to absorb everything, and people in his orbit found themselves wanting to be worthy of his attention without entirely understanding why. He had Diego's jawline already, soft and strong, and something in his expression that was entirely his own, a serenity that seemed too knowing for someone who had been alive for less than a year. He adored Ava from the first week. When she walked into a room, his whole body changed, arms reaching, face opening. That full body joy that babies perform before they learn to be restrained about things that matter. He would fall asleep holding her thumb. He said his first consonant sounds directed at her face. He laughed, genuinely laughed, that intoxicating, helpless baby laugh. The first time she made a face at him over his bottle, and Diego had been standing in the doorway watching, and the sound of it had done something to his chest that he still didn't have the right word for. Eva, for her part, was losing the professional distance she had promised herself she'd maintain. It happened incrementally, the way most inevitable things do. She stopped leaving exactly at 7. She started being in the kitchen when Diego came home, not because she was waiting, but because she was finishing things, and the kitchen was where those things happened to be. She started knowing his coffee order without asking. She noticed when he hadn't eaten because his meetings ran long, and she would leave something on the counter without comment, and he would eat it without comment, and neither of them acknowledged the small ecosystem of consideration that was forming between them. She put Matteo to sleep every night. She had a way of settling him that involved low humming and slow circles on his back, and he would go from restless to deeply asleep within minutes. Diego had watched this happen from the doorway enough times to have memorized the specific way she tilted her head when she listened to check his breathing before she stepped back. He had not meant to memorize it. He just had. 2 months in, there was a night that neither of them spoke about afterward, but both of them carried. There had been a dinner. Diego had come home with takeout from a restaurant she had mentioned once, in passing, that she loved, and he had said nothing about remembering that, just set the bags on the table, and said, "I hope you haven't eaten," in the tone of someone doing something casual and unremarkable. Matteo was already down for the night. They ate at the dining table, which they had never done before. Meals were usually separate, or in the vicinity of Matteo, never deliberately together at the table that sat 8 and held only 2. The conversation moved. It always moved easily now. She told him about a job lead she had seen, a position at a child development research center that she was quietly excited about and quietly terrified of wanting too much. He asked her to describe it and then asked 4 follow-up questions, with the attentiveness of someone who was genuinely interested in her succeeding. "You should apply," he said. "I will," she said. And then, because it was honest, "I am afraid if I apply and they offer it, I'll have to leave. A beat, Matteo," she added. "I'd have to leave, Matteo. That is what I meant." Diego looked at her across the table. She looked back. Neither of them moved. "I know," he said quietly. "That is what I heard." It lasted about 4 seconds. That look. That quiet, charged, impossible 4 seconds, where everything that had been building for 2 months sat directly between them in the space above the takeout containers. And then Ava picked up her glass and Diego glanced toward the hallway, and the moment dissolved the way those moments do, not erased, just pressed flat, folded away into the place where things go when 2 people agree without speaking that now is not the time. She said goodnight 20 minutes later. He cleared the table alone. 3 weeks after the dinner, Diego made a decision. He had been watching Ava for 3 months. He had watched her be brilliant and steady and warm and professionally impeccable in every moment that required it. He had watched her give Matteo exactly what he needed, exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed it, with the kind of intuitive care that no money could manufacture. He had watched her hold the line between employer and something more with a quiet discipline that made him respect her in a way that had nothing to do with want, though the wanting was also there. He was done pretending it wasn't, no, done in a reckless way. Done in the way of a man who had looked at the same truth for long enough that continuing to look past it seemed more dishonest than addressing it. He asked her to come and sit down on a Sunday evening. Her day, he poured her the tea she liked and sat across from her and said, without performance, "I want to make you a different offer." She looked at him steadily. "I am listening. The job that you told me about, the research center, I want you to take it." She hadn't expected that. She waited. "I'll be flexible with hours. You can adjust your schedule here and whatever they need. I'll cover any gap in salary while you are getting established there, and I want to revisit what you are being paid here, regardless." He paused. "You should not have to choose between your career and Matteo. That is not a choice I am willing to make you make." Ava was quiet for a long moment. There was something in her expression that he couldn't fully read, or maybe something he could read too clearly and needed a moment to be dignified about. "Diego," she said, "why are you doing this?" He met her eyes. "Because you are the best thing that has happened to this house," he said, "and I am aware of how that sounds, and I want to be careful with it, but I am not willing to be dishonest about it anymore." The room was very quiet. "You told me when I first offered you this job," he continued, "that babysitting wasn't your dream, I remember. I want to make sure I am not the reason you stay in someone else's dream any longer than you choose to." She set down her tea. That is the most thoughtful thing anyone has said to me in a long time, she said, and her voice was so even and so careful that it made him understand she was working very hard to keep it that way. I have a question, she said. Okay, what happens to us? To this, if I apply and they offer it, and I take it, and I am here less. What happens to whatever this is? Whatever this is, Diego said quietly. I'd like to figure out properly. If you are open to that, a long pause. I am open to that, she said, soft, direct, no performance. He exhaled slowly. The first time she had ever seen him look something close to relieved. Of course, it couldn't be that clean. Nothing that matters ever is. On a Friday evening 6 weeks later, with everything quietly shifting into something neither of them had fully named yet, but both of them were building toward, Diego's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His face changed. I have to take this, he said. He walked to the study and closed the door. Ava was in the living room with Matteo on her lap. She couldn't hear words, only tone, and the tone on the other side of that door was taut and controlled in the particular way that Diego got when something had gone wrong, that he needed to manage. He came out 20 minutes later. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the two of them. Looking at Matteo specifically, in a way that Ava immediately read as something has changed. That was a private investigator, he said. She waited. I had him looking into Serena's whereabouts. No, I wasn't trying to make her come back. I just needed to understand where she was, if she was okay, and he found her. Diego crossed the room and sat down. She is in treatment. She has been in a facility for 6 weeks. That is why she came here when she did. She was already on her way to the facility, and she knew if she waited any longer she might not have the strength to do either thing. Leave Matteo here, or go get help. Ava looked at him. She is his mother, she said carefully. I know, that is going to complicate things. Shh. He looked at her. I am telling you because I don't want there to be things between us that you find out about from somewhere else. Whatever happens next with Serena, about Matteo, about custody, about everything, I want you to know as it happens. She understood what that meant. She understood what he was saying underneath it. Okay, she said. Matteo patted her hand. She looked down at him. He was watching her face with his enormous, calm eyes, wholly unbothered by the weight of everything the adults in his orbit were carrying. She pressed her lips to the top of his head. Diego watched her. He loves you, he said quietly. She didn't look up, I know. A beat. So do I, he said. She looked up then. He didn't look away. That is also not in the contract, she said softly. No, he agreed, it isn't. It didn't happen with a grand gesture. Diego Beccari was not a grand gesture man, or hadn't been before. What he was, Ava learned, was relentlessly consistent. And in a world full of people who said a great deal and delivered very little consistency, turned out to be the most romantic thing she had ever experienced. He learned her coffee order the same week she learned his. He remembered the research center interview date before she reminded him and rearranged his own morning so she could go without worrying about Matteo. He did not try to impress her with his wealth, not once, not deliberately. And somehow that was more impressive than anything a display could have accomplished. He was still learning to be a father. He would be learning for a long time, but he was doing it with a commitment that she found quietly magnificent. He got things wrong, and he owned it. He asked questions without pretending they embarrassed him. He sat on the floor with Matteo for long stretches doing nothing in particular, just being there, and Matteo would crawl onto his lap and they would regard each other with mutual solemnity, and it was the most human thing she had ever seen from someone who had spent so long building walls around his humanity. She got the job at the research center. She told Diego on a Thursday evening standing in the kitchen, and his face did the thing she had come to love most, the thing where something real arrived before he had time to compose it away. He crossed the room without a word and hugged her, a real hug, solid and unhurried and certain. I knew you would, he said against her hair. She stayed. No, because she had to. No, because the money was comfortable, though it was. No, because leaving Matteo was unthinkable, though it was. She stayed because she had walked into a stranger's home on a Thursday afternoon and found something she hadn't known she was looking for, a man made better by a boy he hadn't planned for, a child who needed what she had spent 4 years learning to give. A life that was chaotic and imperfect and alive in every direction. She had come for a job. The feelings were never in the contract. Neither was any of this. Matteo took his first steps on a Sunday. He had been threatening it for 2 weeks, pulling himself up on furniture, standing for 3 seconds before sitting back down with tremendous dignity, studying the physics of the whole thing with an expression of deep scientific consideration. And then one Sunday morning in the living room, with Diego on one side and Ava on the other, and both of them trying very hard not to make a big deal of it so as not to startle him, he let go of the coffee table and walked 4 steps. 5. Then he sat down. Diego made a sound he would later deny. Ava covered her mouth with both hands. Matteo looked at them both, satisfied, and then reached for his bear. Diego looked at Ava. She looked at him, and in between them was everything: the Wednesday night with tea, the dining table, the offer he had almost not made, the phone call about Serena, the hug in the kitchen. 6 months of ordinary, extraordinary mornings. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. She let him. Matteo picked up his bear and walked 4 more steps toward both of them. Some things don't need a contract. They just need time and honesty and the right person walking through the door at the exact right moment, and that is where we leave them. No at a dramatic peak, no at a perfect ending, but at a Sunday morning that means everything, which, if you think about it, is the only kind of ending worth having. If this story moved you, if you felt something at any point in these pages, let us know in the comments below. Tell us your favorite moment. Tell us which character you saw yourself in. Tell us where you are watching from. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because more stories like this one are coming, and you don't want to miss where they go.